And so now, without further ado, it is a pleasure and a privilege for me to invite forward our Shabbat speaker this evening to share his thoughts and his reflections at this sacred time of year. It is a pleasure and a blessing for me to invite Keith Remels to the bima.
I wanted to have one of those beautiful rabbinic parables to talk to you about tonight as I framed my speech. And I couldn't think of one. And instead, what came to mind was kind of a silly, dumb joke about a man who is dyslexic, agnostic, and an insomniac. He stayed up all night wondering if there was a dog. The joke's not really that funny, but the reason it's relatable to us is because haven't many of us, at one time or another in our life, stayed up at night wondering if there was a God? And on this special Shabbat Shuvah, as we read the Haftorah that tells us that we should return to God, what if we don't know the right direction? During this time when so many of us, our families, our community, have suffered loss from Hurricane Harvey, I am humbled to have the opportunity to share with you a little bit about my own journey of loss over the last couple of years, about my attempts to grapple with these questions. I share this not to tell you that what works for me might work for you, and not to suggest that my road doesn't have a long and imperfect journey ahead, but so that together we can focus on our journeys of renewal and redemption. In January of 2016, my family was celebrating the bar mitzvah of my nephew, a happy and joyous occasion in Jewish life. When lunch ended on Saturday, my son Jacob went with his older brother, Miles, to feed his dogs at a house nearby. Shortly after, I heard my wife on the phone. She cried out, "Jacob's been shot." We rushed to where he was, and as I ran up to the house, we were told by a policeman at the scene, matter-of-factly, that someone there was deceased. That someone was my son Jacob. Yaakov Moshe, 15 at the time, had died suddenly from an accidental gunshot. I was in shock. I was full of unanswerable questions, including, where was God? But soon, I would find out that God was there for me in my darkest time, and that Judaism would illuminate a path, even if I might need that light repeatedly. It's Jewish tradition to hold the funeral as soon as possible. My son's funeral. I couldn't even say the words. The thought of it was paralyzing. Here I was, a professional fixer, and this situation was unfixable. As I stood at home that morning trying to get dressed, all I could think was, I don't want to go. I don't want this to be real. I don't want to bury my son. But as someone noted to Sheryl Sandberg after the sudden death of her husband, option A wasn't available. The funeral was now the second worst day of my life. A life I knew was indelibly changed. I had to think about my option B. This was the first step toward realizing that our faith held a guide for dealing with the unimaginable, a directive to take this first step in the grieving process, and instructions for how to carry it out. It would be immediately followed by 7 days of sitting Shiva, a period of our deepest grief. Our community, our friends, people I hadn't seen in years, were present to lend their love and support. Then during the following 30-day period, the period of Shloshim, a period intended to help start climbing out of that deepest grief, I came here each evening to this beautiful place. Each evening I would pray, I would say Kaddish, and I would speak Jacob's name. I would pray for the elevation of his soul, and I would pray that my family would find comfort and healing. I had never before come here before for weeknight minyan. Strangely, here I was at the lowest point in my life, and I found myself extolling praise for God. What was happening and why? Despite how it might sound, I really wasn't actively seeking God. I was searching for answers to my unanswerable questions. Unfolding in front of me was an awareness that as I was spiraling down, Judaism was there to catch me and ultimately help lift me up again. Don't get me wrong. I was still depressed. I still felt the longing of not being able to get one of Jacob's big hugs, not being able to physically see him, missing his big personality, and even missing dealing with the struggles that came along with his teenage years. But I had to start anew. I began to start my days with the morning ritual of saying the Modeh Ani prayer, a prayer of gratitude for simply waking up and being alive. The miracle of life was something I could no longer take for granted. I also came to pray at Shabbat services on Saturday mornings. I didn't grow up in a very observant family, and at first there was much I didn't know. But gradually, as I learned, I felt more comfortable and looked forward to those Shabbat morning services. I still look forward to coming, to praying the words of both ancient and modern text. I look forward to being here with the loyal community of congregants that are here on Saturday mornings. Each of them, I believe, are finding God in their own way. It demonstrated to me how God can act through us. And we've seen that yet again in recent weeks as our community has exemplified what it might mean to be B'Tselem Elohim, made in God's image. For me, each time I sit down to pray, I feel a small weight off my shoulders. I found that in prayer, God was here for me, to listen to me, to comfort me, to guide me back to life. If that's not deserving of praise, I don't know what is. I took advantage of opportunities to study Torah with the amazing group of rabbis and cantor that we have here at Emmanuel. And through this learning, what was becoming clear was that our ancestors had unanswerable questions as well. As I learned of their adversities, their triumphs and their struggles, their interactions with God and God's interactions with them, I was reminded that I was not the first, nor sadly would I be the last to experience loss. What we do after loss is what makes a difference. I felt connected in a way that defied the timeline of so many thousands of years, and I was not alone in my quest. I would come home and have lunch on Saturdays with my wife, Debbie. We would talk about the weekly Torah portion, a ritual, a prayer. Early on, it created a time for us to process our grief together. It created time for us to raise each other up and to talk about Jacob. It allowed us time to strengthen our family. I used to treat Saturday just like any other day of the week. And suddenly I recognized that there was true power in this ritual of Shabbat. Each of us has stress and adversity that we face in our lives. We have hectic, overscheduled days. The spiritual oasis of Shabbat was an antidote, a period of learning, and importantly, a period of rest and restoration. The path of Jewish ritual had opened up to me. It also revealed the beauty in one of our faith's central themes, that of the importance of celebrating life. Living up to my own life's potential and embracing Jacob's eternal soul were not mutually exclusive, and I believe that our faith demands that we do both. There's a story in the Torah where Jacob has a dream of a ladder with angels ascending to and descending from heaven. And just before Jacob wakes from his dream, God tells Jacob that he will always be with him. And when Jacob awoke from this dream, he says these words, "Surely God is in this place, and I did not know it." As I began to awake from my deepest grief, such is what I too found as the answer to my questions. Prayer and ritual had helped guide my path back. Drawing on the wisdom of our sages, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of the UK, expressed it this way: prayer opens our eyes to the wonder of the world, our ears to the still small voice of God. It opens our hearts to those that need our help. Ultimately, God is where we let him in. On this Sabbath of return, I pray that in the year ahead, each of us find space to let God in, and that we be inscribed in the book of life for a year of happiness and a year of peace. Shabbat Shalom.